Okay.
We hear you okay.
All right.
Okay. So Marlon, we're here in front of around 20 plus people that just watched your film. It is 8 p.m. in Manila right now. And I'm just about to introduce Angel. And Angel will be, Angel will be introducing both you and Cian. We'd like to introduce you to Angel Velasco, who is our moderator for this discussion. Angel Velasco Shaw is a media artist, educator, curator, and cultural organizer currently living in Manila. Her documentaries have screened in American, European, and Asian film festivals, museums, galleries, and schools. Film collections include the Metropolitan Museum of Manila, Cinematheque's Schweizer Film Archive, Casa Asia, and the Museum of Modern Art. She is an associate professor in the School of Arts and Sciences, Communications Arts Department, and the director of the Institute for Heritage, Culture, and the Arts at Philippine Women's University. You may have also seen her show last year at Drawing Room in the CCP, which is called Inverted Telescope, which a lot of us enjoyed very much. So I leave the floor to Angel.
Hi. Thank you all for staying and for seeing Bontoc Eulogy. Just a quick question before I introduce Marlon and Cian. Have any of you seen this film before? Okay. So Marlon, 3 people raised their hands that they've seen the film before, just so you know. Can you hear me?
Good.
Okay. Okay. Hi Marlon, it's been a really long time.
Hi.
Hope you're well. Okay, so Marlon Fuentes is a Filipino filmmaker, photographer, and conceptual artist. He attended De La Salle University in Manila and did his BA in Anthropology and Behavioral Science in 1974. He received an MBA from Wharton School of Business in Philadelphia, PA in 1977. In 1981, he moved to Washington, D.C. to study photography at the Kauffman School of Art under Markod. He has displayed his work in over 60 exhibitions over the course of 15 years and is represented in the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American Art and many other prestigious art institutions. As a filmmaker, his work follows new terrain uncovered by his previous investigations in photography. Cian Dayrit, who I've recently met, but I have had the pleasure of being able to see. This is his 3rd exhibition. I'm hoping, for me, I should say, that I've seen it. I know you've been around longer than that. In any case, has everyone here had a chance to see the exhibition that's up there? So you're familiar with the history or its origins in terms of Cian's residency in Bataan? Okay, I'm going to let Cian talk more about his process, actually, as a way of introduction to his work. And then Marlon, I'd also like you to talk about your process, specifically moving from your photography as it evolved into filmmaking. And then also because your background is very diverse and lends itself fabulously to Bontoc Eulogy as well. So maybe we could start there with the 2 of you talking about your processes in relationship to the works that is up of Cian's and Bontoc Eulogy. Is that okay? Marlon?
Sure.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Hello. Okay. Hey Marlon, thank you for letting us see your film here. I don't know how much of my work that you know. My artistic practice is relatively new. I finished my undergrad in 2011 in UP here in Manila. I'm just based here in Manila, born and raised and work here in Manila. I work as a visual artist and a researcher. And as a visual artist, I work with various media. I was trained as a painter, but I also do installation and sculpture. Most of my work is research-based. My first project in 2013 was in Vargas Museum, wherein I had made a fictional ancient civilization out of its material past. So it's like reverse engineered archaeology. So I had fabricated artifacts from like everyday like art material like resin or ceramic, and then supported these objects with text employing archaeological and ethnographic language, if you will. And then also supporting these installations with a timeline of Philippine prehistory with my own prehistory superimposed upon them, predating some of the most prominent Filipino artifacts. Plus also maps and topographical diagrams where some of these objects were found. And then on the other projects include or talk about faith practices, also a history of class struggle here within contemporary Philippine psyche. This project, which is currently on view now, wherein we watched your film as part of a public program, is my exhibition after an 8-month-long residency in Bataan with Bellas Artes Projects. So I was invited in late 2016, and then I started 2017. So I was going around Bataan and I was looking through literature about it and just getting a feel of local consciousness, what people knew of their own heritage as Bataan locals. And a lot of things that people knew of Bataan and about Bataan, and a lot of the literature and museums were talking about Bataan Death March and World War II and the Japanese occupation. So I wanted to offer an alternative, or maybe a different narrative, to turn into an exhibition. Because like as a visual artist, which I'm not exclusively mastering on any particular material, but if anything, I guess the platform of the exhibition is what I sort of play around with. So I wanted to make an exhibition about the local history and culture of the Aitas here in Bataan. So I've been going back and forth for 8 months from Bataan to Manila, sort of visiting libraries and archives here in Manila to sort of check out what material there was available about the Aitas in Bataan. And unlike the Cordilleras, the Igorots there, or Aitas among other Aitas scattered around the Philippines, there was not much literature about the Aitas in Bataan. So that's where I started. I gathered whatever information I could and whatever literature and archival images I could from various sources here in Manila. Lopez Museum, National Archives, UP Center for Ethnomusicology, which there was a lot of. Basically digging my nose into various archives, looking for traces of any recording or literature or image of these communities, which no one knew much about. But they were there, and they've always been there, and they've been there longer than we've been around. Maybe I can go on talking about that later. But then, so my practice as a visual artist would be to sort of interpret data which I've gathered and maybe translate them into the exhibitionary, particularly objects and images and installations. And then basically the experience of viewing an exhibit, as if walking through a museum and picking up and gathering information. So this is what sort of turned out. And then as the months passed by, Marlon, you still there?
Yeah, I'm listening.
Okay. I got to more directly integrate with the communities because this is also, I guess, my crash course into ethnography. I just heard that you have an MA in anthropology. I'm also particularly interested in this branch of study and ethnography as a practice, as a way to inform one's artistic practice. So like I said, this is a crash course for me into ethnography. And even if I did not directly or in-depth integrate with the communities, there would have already been an exhibition based on historical data I gathered from the archives here in Manila and a little bit from Bataan. But then I did not just want to frame them from a distance as a culture of the past. I wanted initially to present them as how they are now, but then at the same time, that's problematic because I am not in any authority to do that. So I wanted to share this exhibition's platform to them so they can co-author this exhibition and collaborate with me on some of the research, in particular some of the photographs and details of their local history, because I don't know if you've seen some of the installation shots, but we have a working timeline of their local history. So I'm wanting to bring this exhibition back to Bataan, particularly back to the Aita communities, so they can go on and continue this authorship of their representation. But then that's not exactly like a very easy thing to do, because I guess the experience of the exhibitionary is not a very common experience one shares with the rest of the Philippine population, I suppose. I guess generally in the Philippines we're not much of exhibition goers, as opposed to going to the cinema for certain classes or going to church. So it's not exactly a common practice in terms of getting to know one's heritage. But if anything, this is what I think the function of museums or exhibitions. This is actually the function of museums, is to sort of present or represent heritage or identity or history of our culture. So yeah, that's kind of the gist.
Marlon, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So would you like to share with the audience here a little bit about what inspired you to do this piece, and also the kind of the decision-making process that you went through, even to the whole, how you constructed it. So to talk about it also within the context of creating what is now being called like a fake documentary or a mockumentary.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was working as a photographer and visual artist for a long time before I started working on film. Most of my work was most of the issues I was working with as a photographer did exclude time, and so I invented the word. I was chronophobic. What that meant to me was, for 15 years I was in the U.S. I was working, and I led two lives. I had a day job. I was working in a utility company, in a gas company, And I was, interestingly enough, I was doing strategic planning because I had an MBA from Morton. So I was doing kind of consulting type stuff. And I was also a photographer, but I was mostly doing kind of fetishistic investigations that was based on anthropology. So if you combine kind of auto-narrative with ethnography and surrealism, the intersection of those three areas, that was kind of my sweet spot. But I was chronophobic in the sense that even though I was dealing with the context of narrative and history, consciously or unconsciously, I was excluding duration. I didn't know how to deal with history on a personal level. And I remember distinctly I made an installation. But at that time I was already, like Cian, kind of concerned and interested in investigating the relationship between truth, objective reality, and the representation and subjective assessment and investigation of that truth. Particularly, I slowly became very interested in the tension, the relationship and the tension behind the representation and what the truth claims were of media such as photography, because at that time there wasn't a whole lot of investigation of what makes something authentic or what makes something a copy. This was just the beginning of postmodern work in postmodern, the conversation in postmodern work with works like Cindy Sherman and Sierra Levine, etc., and appropriation were beginning to come out. This was in I remember in the 80s, and in New York there was a lot of conversation about appropriation and the postmodern object. So that was kind of the periphery of my consciousness. And I remember anecdotally, I had a installation that I made where my fiction character, which I sometimes use as a writer, but also as a visual artist, her name was Mia Blumentritt, because I grew up in Blumentritt actually. And the last place that I left was, of course, Mia and my friend Enrico Busan, who you know is the brother of Ramon Busan. I don't know if you guys know him. He's a world famous. His work is actually has been shown in the Cultural Center. And Cian, you would appreciate Ramon Busan. I think he died a few years ago. I actually did the last interview of him. He was a very erudite person, although not formally trained as an anthropologist. He collected all the dances from northern Luzon all the way up to Mindanao, of ancient tribal customs. He actually took extensive ethnographic footage in Super 8 and 16. I don't know if he did it in 16, but mostly Super 8 and then later on video. So he had a very complete archive. Anyway, going back to the anecdote, I remember a show I had in Arlington, Virginia, where Mia Blumentritt was the one creating a statistical analysis of the value of people's limbs, but it was dependent on what country. So I would say, it was basically a very detailed representation of statistics that assess the value of limbs. So it would say, what is the value of your hand from the wrist down? What is the value of your arm from the elbow down, from the shoulder down, and from the legs, from your hip joint to the foot, or from the knee joint to the foot, from the ankle to the foot. And I was comparing different, or rather, Mia Blumentritt was comparing how countries valued their limbs depending on what location they were. And the whole piece was I was representing Mia Blumentritt because I assisted her, but Mia Blumentritt was unable to come to the exhibition, so I kind of represented her. So I remember at that point, and that was 2 years before I was doing film, I thought, looking backwards, I found it interesting because that was the first kind of a formal fissure of being able to realize that the area of representation, especially the tension of what was real and unreal, assuming you had the craft to simulate what was real and the whole paradigm of a scientific investigation as a modality of representation. That science, for example, and specifically anthropology and archaeology, were ways of interpreting history, were ways of interpreting how we reacted to the world, and also that it was one of a very dominant way of epistemology, of viewing ourselves, of viewing how we dealt with reality and with the world. So then, at that point, on a personal level, I was very conflicted because on one hand, my life was a kind of bundle of conflict, because on one hand, I was playing the part of an immigrant in the US, but at the same time, I had my own kind of a suspect investigation in what my role was, what was I doing here in America, and I had difficulty in establishing and having any kind of footing in terms of my own identity vis-a-vis my growing up in Manila, and I was also experiencing kind of the reversal of the gaze. I was always an outsider, and yet I was trying to establish my footing in a land that I could never be part of. So, and so now I realize why in my previous investigations, I was consciously or unconsciously not dealing with duration. And so at that point, I said, okay, I'm just gonna go take a break from my day job, and that's when I applied to film school, and I went to film school, and that was mostly at that point, soon after 2 years, and getting familiar with technology of film, getting familiar with immersed into the conversation about film, specifically ethnographic film, and I met a very knowledgeable and respected anthropologist who was very interested in the issues of reflexivity, which is to say, his name Jay Ruby. I think he's retired now.
Yes.
Jay Ruby was a fantastic a professor in Temple, and I got to be friends with him. And his main area of research was about representation in cinema and what was the native voice. So I became extremely immersed in ethnographic film, which is a subspecialty of documentary, right? So you have the taxonomy was documentary film, and then ethnographic film, and then at that point I was exposed to films. I was exposed to films that were kind of fake films. I mean, so there were two films. I forgot the name now, but there was a guy who was presumably it was a kind of a diaristic film, and then in the end, the reveal was the denouement was that it was a fake film. It wasn't really autodiaristic film, he just made it up. But I was enamored with his ability to create a veneer of reality, and then I questioned, well, what makes it a good film? Is it a good film because it was a simulation, a simulacra, or is it a good film precisely because it was trying to emulate reality, but at the same time admitting that it was an artifice? So at that point, I went into a deeper investigation, and then I discovered the phenomenon of the World's Fair. And when I read about 1904, I realized that, okay, this is a good matrix on which to test my ideas. And so the whole film was a creation, was an autoethnographic document. But at this point, I was reversing the gaze, and I was creating my own history, so to work kind of as a scaffolding for my own ideas about immigration, for my own ideas about being a stranger in a land that I think still viewed Filipinos in the diaspora as alien. But Angel, as you know, there's a whole kind of conversation in kind of Asian American politics, because the dominant force of quote unquote the Asian American is really the reified kind of Chinese/Japanese, and to some extent Korean, but mostly in the late 70s and 80s, where there doesn't really a dominant conversation about Asian American politics. The Filipinos at that point were still on the margins, were still on the periphery of representation of what was the Asian American identity. So the Pinoys, they say, well, you're not really Asian, are you? You know, that kind of stuff. So it's like, at that point, so there was a lot of elements studying, and I would say, oh, I remember talking to older people then. I remember when I was a kid, you know, your people, they used to live in trees, etc., etc. Meanwhile, there was a stereotype that if you were a Filipino, you were potentially a nurse, or you were working on a cruise ship or whatever. So there were certain kind of representational tropes of what the Pinoy was supposed to be. So just keep fucking quiet and be a good nurse. That kind of stuff, right? So it was like, that was kind of the context, so to speak, of my trying to make a film about the Filipinos in 1904. So it was like, it was a kind of reverse telescope, so to speak, of history and my own experience as an immigrant, and my experience with photography. Does that make sense? Or I was just kind of like rambling Joe here, but I was trying to give you a context of where how this was made.
I actually think that the context is extremely important, and also why I think this gathering tonight between you and Cian is also very important. I'm not sure, maybe you could just tell us briefly, were you able to see any of the images of Cian's, the overall exhibition, and then parts of it, or not?
Yeah, I actually freaked out, Cian, when I saw the photos of your exhibition. I said, holy crap, this guy's inside my brain. He took part of my brain and put it and made an installation. Because when I saw it, I said, wait a second, did I do this work? Who made this work?
Okay, can we pick up from
this
there,
guy
guys?
inside my head.
Oh, I think you guys are in both.
I would like to congratulate Cian. You're a brilliant artist. Holy shit. Like I said, this guy's inside my head. and
No,
was
I think
working on
maybe you were
issues.
siblings in a past life.
So it's like a kind of a doppelganger, or kind of like maybe you were my son from a different wife or something.
Well, what was it that you said at the end of the film? Where, you know, your children or their grandchildren are going to be the ones who are going to remember. And it's interesting, I think, that I don't know if you were able to see some of the titles of the books that Cian has. So you can see that, and I'm hoping that the audience here can also, the enormous amounts of research that the two of these artists do in their work. And because, you know, in terms of talking a little bit about common ground, which is something that I want to bring up, but I actually just want to turn to the audience for a minute, Marlon, even though I'm sorry you can't see them, but just to try to engage them. So if anyone in the audience has specific questions that they'd like to ask Marlon about the film or his process or Cian, things that you're noticing in terms of why did Marlon even just say maybe you were my son? You know, maybe any questions or comments?
Angel, before I forget, Angel, you know what freaked me out when Cian was saying that he was doing exploration in the archive, because that was exactly what I was doing. I was doing research in the Anthropology Museum in UPenn, right? And that's where I unearthed all the old films. And I was also in the National Archives, where I was friends with Dr. Jake Homiak, and he was, I was basically like a mole, like a rat inside the National Archives. I was there for days. I would go inside when the museum opened, when Smithsonian opened, and they'd have to drag me out late in the afternoon when they were closing. Then I'll be back again, like an eager guy waiting for lollipops at the store, except that I was wading through literally tens of thousands of pictures of people from Bataan, from the tribes, from the Bontocs all the way up to the Mindanao tribes. So I was, like when Cian was talking, I said, wow, it was like I was talking because he was going through the same path of investigation. So it's, let me tell you, it's a very strange feeling when I see the work of a person like Cian. It's like one generation to another generation. The problem is still there. The formal issues of aesthetics and representation, the emergence of a distinct line of investigation, aesthetically that is, between science, what it purported to represent, and the underlying reality of representation. It's a very wonderful feeling to have a kind of co-investigator kind of continuing that line of, for want of a better word, science. Just the same way that scientists have an unbroken conversation about the same basic issues of what physics is or what chemistry is, etc. And then today, with Cian extending the same level of interest and art practices over time. And I'm sure, Cian, when you get as old as me, then you'll see another young person kind of following up on your art practice and the currency on which you are kind of creating a continued conversation over time. It's very reassuring, but it's also kind of freakishly humbling, so to speak.
You know, Marlon, I just wanted to let you know that many communities, or let's just say several communities in the Cordilleras, have had the opportunity to see Bontoc Eulogy as well. And the impact for whether they're young or old or somewhere in between of the indigenous peoples in the Cordilleras, for them to see a film like Bontoc Eulogy is overwhelming for them. And especially because many of them themselves don't know the history of the 1904 World's Fair. And there's a lot of mythology surrounding that history as well. But I wanted to, just for a moment again, to ask the audience if they would like to engage in this dialogue, because there is so much that needs to be talked about. I think that I brought up the reception of Bontoc Eulogy in the Cordilleras, largely because also Cian has this desire to bring the work that he's done, which is now in a gallery, and bring it back to the communities, to the very community that collaborated with him. And I think that these are very, very important ways for artists, cultural practitioners, for those of you in the audience, if you're not artists, but you're have great interests in cultural exchange, that these kinds of practices where you have these synergies occurring are really, really important, especially in this day and age when we're more fractured than we've ever been. Right? So if I could just, anybody in the audience, do you want to have a question or a comment? Jan has a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to know why, so you speak about the limitations of being in the arts and how with this specific local audience, the experience of walking into an exhibition or a museum is not usually natural to us. Not natural might not be the word, but the accessibility of museums or these public spaces for arts and culture is rarely there. So I'm wondering why, this is for Marlon and Cian, why you chose the strategy of becoming an artist with a very specific interest in ethnography, Cian archaeology as well, and anthropology. And what are, if there are any, what are the goals of your practice in terms of also your relationship with your audience and yeah.
Okay, I'm wanting to find ways on how objects can tell stories differently. And when I say objects, coming from my visual arts training, I guess it can also mean a lot of things. From gestures to experiences, and also up to language, and how you could sort of play around with all these things put together, and then different ways on how all these things put together can tell stories. That's why I guess within the past couple of years I've been trying to look into various angles of thought or articulating things from different historiographies, from using the material past and the language of archaeology to maybe looking into like the political economy or geography or various articulations of a struggle, among other things. So the way I see it as a visual artist, I will constantly try to, for lack of a better term, try to push the envelopes of the exhibitionary for now. But then, like, I'm interested in seeing how I can directly engage and integrate with the audience via my work now, working with the communities. So I'm also wanting to hear from Marlon's side how, like, if he's seen the reaction or have heard feedback from the Cordillera communities when they saw his work, and how does that change his way of practicing his art or readings.
I haven't had, is my audio okay?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. I haven't really had a direct experience post-production of the film of the Cordilleras, but I don't know if you guys know the history in the way I created the voice that Enrico Ubusan, he's the actor I used as the surrogate for the for Markod, talking to the voice, talking to the recording device. That voice was actually, this is how perverse the sensibility is, because I had Fermina Bagwan, who is actually a Bontoc, who was actually, I don't know if she's still alive, but at that point she was already in her 70s when I worked with Madam Fermina. She was part of the BAP, which is a Cordilleran community group. But I was with her, and she was part of the Washington DC chapter of the Cordilleran group. Fermina Bagwan, interestingly, had relatives that were actually shown in 1904. So I made her read a recovered text that was attributed to an interview of a Bontoc native who was shown in 1904, and he was interviewed about 2 years later when he was being exhibited, quote unquote, in Coney Island in a kind of sequel to 1904. Because as you know, all of the facts that I was saying in the film as a narrator happened. The only thing that is not true is the way I juxtapose some of the images that were actually made in 1920s rather than 1904. Of course, because there was no 16mm film in 1904. My appropriation and my ad hoc kind of mixture was kind of plus or minus, 20 years, so to speak. But the point was, in answer to Cian's question, I did not get any kind of direct feedback from the Cordilleran, but I subsequently, after my collaboration with BAP, I think it kind of raised a lot of important issues, because it was also working as a kind of quasi-historical film. So there was a level of text that had some credibility because it was well researched, but there was also a lot of questions that I was raising in terms of the autoethnographic movement that I kind of sort of started here in the U.S. And also the intersection between investigation about early cinema. So there were a lot of, that's why I think it has a lot of legs. Even now it's still being studied in graduate schools here in the U.S. because I purposely created a text that was multi-layered. It was really a representation of, it was really an investigation, number one, of early cinema and how early cinema kind of prefigured our relationship to cinematic representation. So that's more like film history. And then there was also this area of investigation about the autoethnographic document and how ethnography prefigures in how we investigate the other cultures that are part of us but are different. And then also, how does one, and then the other one was a kind of a diaristic exploration, is, how does one document a life, whether the historical Markod or the historical stories of the Bontocs as they went through 1904 and subsequently disappeared, and a kind of personal journaling. So the film was almost kind of like a journal for me, because I was trying to create my own history so that it was kind of a balancing effect, to create a solid footing of where I was and where I was headed. So there was a lot of intersections between these different layers or these different lenses, so to speak. But that conversation between communities that saw the film, there were differences. Some of them basically looked at it as a historical kind of PBS, public broadcasting kind of movie that was historical, and some other people, the more sophisticated they were in terms of the conversation in cinema or film history or ethnography, they would also see that, hey, it's a live kind of topic that the film has embedded. So people were approaching it from different ways depending on what their interests were. So it was a kind of a multifaceted film, which from the very beginning, that was my original intention, because I wanted to embody a lot of my interests. I don't know if you know, but I went to Philippine Science, and in fact, I think I was the third class of Philippine Science. When we were first in Diliman, we were literally in a building that looked like a kind of pig farm. You know, it was made of hollow blocks, and I remember when in high school there were construction holes that got filled like a small lake when it rained, and we were swimming in there. And so these were the future scientists to be. Unfortunately, I didn't become a scientist, and I became a photographer and filmmaker instead. But I always had the same sensibility of investigation and understanding that what science was a continuous conversation about reality, about the physical world, the biological world, but that the ways of investigation between art and science are basically the same. And that's why I'm fascinated with Cian, because it's kind of a passing of the torch. And these sources were both research and it was kind of reappropriating the sensibilities as well of archaeologists and anthropologists and a social scientist.
Well, I think that, actually this is a perfect segue into what are some of the commonalities of, both of you have already mentioned them, not just in terms of your process and research, but your concerns. And that there are these very real relationships between the arts and sciences, and certainly within artists such as yourselves. One of the things that struck me is you're both truth seekers, but the way that of course there's a difference between doing this through film and through a lot of found footage, archival footage, and how you, in a very, very brilliant way, in a very seamless way, was able to create a narrative that one inherently has to question, is it truth, whose truth, and what do we do with this? I think, I actually saw a lot of that footage before I saw your film in the National Archives, and sat on my fists while I was watching it, because I was so offended by the World's Fair, and it was a shocker to my system as an American-born Filipino. And then when I saw your film, and that was actually the first time I met you, was at the, I think it was the Margaret Mead Film Festival, and some members of the audience were quite upset when they found out that that these were not your grandfathers. And I thought to myself, this is a really important question that I think we also have to ask ourselves, because we also construct history of ourselves. And I think whether you're an immigrant in the United States, or if you're an American-born, if you are of Philippine origins and you've been so heavily colonized in the way that we have been, that it's a natural question. It may not be conscious, but we're constantly reinventing and constantly finding. We're like constantly in the lost and found. I mean, I love that scene where you're looking at that brain, and you know, it's like you're seeking, and I think it's a great metaphor. And then you walk through Cian's exhibition here, and you can get a sense of, or this again, the question: what's reality? Whose reality? Of course, there's certain the photographs, for instance, Marlon. I'm not sure if you got a chance to really see those. But you can clearly see that these are images that were taken in very intimate kinds of ways. These are images that Cian had actually shared earlier, that some of them, a series of them were taken by the community members themselves, and then there were images that were given to be shown in the exhibition. So I believe that both of you have created works that are timeless. You know, and I think that's part of the success of Bontoc Eulogy, is because it is timeless. It'll always have a place in life, and especially because so many people remain ignorant of the 1904's World Fair. And people are still being put on display today. They just don't realize it. But I'm just curious to hear from both of you what you think of the kinds of comments or observations that I'm making. And then again, I'm one of these people where if I'm going to moderate, I need to hear from the audience as well. Because we have the privilege of waking up, or sorry, but I mean, we have the privilege of being able to also have Marlon here. And so if people have questions for him as well, or comments related to the comments that I just made. Anyone? Okay, Marlon, someone's going to ask her to say something, okay? Can you hear us?
Yeah, you were kind of fading in and out earlier, but
oops, sorry.
I can hear you now.
Okay, someone's going to say something.
Yeah, just in terms of commonalities, Cian, I don't know if you saw in the film, but I think I saw the same image of T. Worcester. And so for that, when that showed, I don't know Marlon, but one of the shelves is a collection of Worcester's photographs. And so in talking about commonalities, you guys referenced a specific photograph in the film and in Cian's exhibition. And so Cian, maybe you can elaborate more on what your impressions were immediately after, while viewing the film, because this was the first time that you watched it as well, right? Yeah.
Hello? I guess the experience just now of viewing it for the first time was quite similar to what Angel was narrating just a while ago, wherein some images or footages, it was while watching your film just now that was the first time I viewed some of them. So it's an interesting experience to view something for the first time where you know it's already been processed and digested from an artistic angle. Because working as an artist who works with archives as well, once an archive or once a collection has gone under the nose of someone who's madly looking through information of images or moving images or time-based whatever information, that's when you know, like, the information's already been, I don't know, tampered with or played around with because of the playful mind of the reader. So I also like the idea with about using indigeneity as a subject matter, because when you're actually live in person with a community of a certain indigeneity, and you're eventually to represent them one way or another, as an artist, as a writer, as an academic, as a whatever. Your existence there has already done something. To know that one is being viewed is already sort of staking your position and maybe staking some sort of imposition within the environment. So I guess with all of this and working with the archive and then dealing with the memory that is connected with the archive, I'm also trying to see how in your practice you address the issue of agency and the institutions wherein these various forms of information are distributed, like the archives or the academe. Because in my process, I've collected a lot of work within the academe, and then if anything, it's also some sort of a critique within the academe as a structure, as a social structure, because what is written within the academe stays within the academe, and that is one of the most problematic premises that I'm trying to address, not just in this exhibition, but then in the past as well. So, yeah.
Well, both of you have, your investigations are extremely layered. And I think that, again, a lot of the layering has to do with these images and these artifacts exist in places and in time. And these cultures are still alive, okay? I mean, as far as I know, people are not headhunting anymore. But many of the other practices that the various indigenous groups were forced to perform and do are still practiced today. And I think that what both of you are doing are inherently showing that these are cultures that are alive. I have a question for both of you in terms of your use of appropriation, and that you use appropriation in very, very sensitive and conscious ways, and I think with great respect for the cultures that you are appropriating. And appropriation is a tricky practice, and it's a tricky word, right? So that's why I just wanted to try to contextualize it. And that the footage that you have where you have the, what do you call those, contortionists? And then you have like the elephant, you have like these things that are humorous and perverse. And then Cian has these heads. He has these very different kinds of sculptures. And then also Cian works with other artisans and collaborates with them to make the work that is in this exhibition, which I also find as testimony to how you both respect the practices of other people. But you're both kind of poking fun, but within a critical way. Marlon, I'm not sure if you're going to follow me because I don't know if you saw the heads of that Cian has. Were you able to see those sculptures?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so you know what I'm referring to then. So I'm basically trying to make a comparative link, and this is for the benefit of the audience, I think more so, in terms of why are these two people being brought together for this gathering? And I'm hoping that that's making sense.
Yeah.
Marlon, do you want to say something?
Yeah, while you were talking, Angel, several things came to mind. I feel like 100 or 200 years from now, when Cian's work and my work is gonna be part of the archaeological layer of, let's say, 2000, you know, maybe it's 2200, right? And we're just gonna be like 1 micron thick in that layer of archaeology. And then a person who, let's say, is a great grandchild of Angel and Cian would look at that layer and say, wow, look at this, there's like a mutation. There was the Eta and there was the Bontoc, and then there looks like visual record of them, but why is it jumbled? Why is there a gap? What's the noise here? Is this a picture of the real thing, or is it an interpretation? And it's kind of perverse, because when you put a long distance chronology, our investigations right now would be a blip, and then people in the future would be confused as like, dang, what is this? I can't figure out, because all of a sudden it's kind of like, to use an analog term, it looks like it skipped, and I can't figure out what happened in that distance between 1904 and then looks like this is 1995 vintage, but what happened here? So they want be able to know, and then maybe that will be the topic of investigation. Then it's like, why is there a gap in history, and why all of a sudden in early century, 21st century, there was this intensive fetishistic investigative impulse of analyzing what history was saying, right? Because maybe at that point everything is homogenized and history no longer exists. It's just multiple shouting viewpoints, where actually people don't have to talk anymore, because everything is embodied in a chip, and we're just walking about consuming continuously.
That is so dark.
It's funny how we're both sort of working with data from a collection or from archives that is a collective representation of a lot of things, and now we're working with this collection of a collection, and then 200 years from now we would be part of this greater matrix of collections, sort of like instead of dealing with very particular fragments of information, we'd be referring to hyperlinks of or like a more complex, or I don't know, like what I'm saying. But then we're sort of as we reference on other representations, as years and generations go by, the next artists or people who will be dealing with the archives will be dealing with our digested, processed pieces.
They may be appropriating the two of you.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, because then it's like an appropriation with an appropriation with an appropriation. But I wanted to ask you, what do your children think now? They must be, your daughter must be in her 20s, no?
Yeah, my daughter is a musician, and you know what's interesting? It's really perverse, Angel. You would love this kind of irony. She works as a music supervisor. That's the craft that she wants to go in. And right now she's working for a firm called Song Trader. Look it up, Song Trader, S-O-N-T-R-A-D-R.
Oh my God.
Right, so you take out the E, so Song Trader. Now Song Trader, here's what they're doing, Angel. You'll appreciate this effing sense of humor. So they get submissions from all over the world, guess what, including the Philippines, right, of music, right? And then her job is to create a tag for a specific music. So for example, because you know they use music for film, for videos, for YouTube, etc. So let's say Cian was a composer, he'll create a song, and then a music supervisor's job, number one, is to categorize that as nostalgia, hit. So they would get sort of like tuba, throat singing, or Bulgarian choir music, and they would put a tag, a kind of an archaeological tags like a post-hit Bulgarian hip hop, right? So when a producer said, hey, can you get me a kind of quasi post hip hop Bulgarian defined by kind of Brooklyn post 5-3 feel, they have to have a tag. So they kind of put like multiple layers of tags so that if Angel was making a film and she wants to recreate like 1980s interaction in the corner of Main Street and Spruce in Brooklyn, they can get a specific music for that, right? So I said, holy crap, this is so insane. This is the kind of investigation that I'm doing, but then now it's kind of a formalized business model of kind of tagging history and tagging emotion and tagging the products by which we can create syncretic histories and syncretic stories, right, that Hollywood is appropriating. So I guess what I'm saying is my scenario of the long now, in 200, 300 years, like history won't even matter because we can just choose whatever we want to believe or we want to choose. It is a matter of choice. Because guess what? Everything is tagged. So they'll say, hey, I want to experience this. The kind of like this guy named Cian, he's a very famous guy in the 21st century. And I want to, what's Cian's tag anyway? And then add that to what Fuentes was doing and then give me a new tag. That's what I want to experience, and then they just consume it. I think that's what's going to happen.
Well, I'm hoping that actually that your film can still be screened in film. I'm hoping that Cian's works will be preserved in many different ways as well, like a book, and possibly a website or digital storytelling where people can add to it. I think that your assessment is a very disturbing one in terms of history and whether or not it's going to exist, but it's very Orwellian. But at the same time, I would like to, because I don't think you 100% believe that, Marlon, but I am going to be in LA, so I would very much like to catch up with you and meet your daughter. I'll be there in April. But
good. We'll have lunch.
Let's invite Abe, because Abe's been trying to find you too. But in any case,
Wait, he's in LA?
Marlon, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be in LA.
Oh, I'm gonna go next week. Maybe we can like hang out.
Marlon, Cian's gonna be in LA.
Oh, let's meet up, Cian.
There.
Okay, so
That'll be fun. You guys have my email?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I would like one audience member. Yay!
Yeah.
Okay.
Hang on, we have one audience member who actually knows because you were very active when Marlon was talking about, what's his name? The musician?
Oh,
The
Ramon
dancer?
Busan? Yeah, because Ramon was, I think it was
Can
his
you
sister.
introduce yourself to us, Marlon?
I'm Teddy. I'm taking up my master's right now in UP Diliman for film. And actually, one of the films that we watched is Bontoc Eulogy. So, there was a project with the UNESCO, it's called Memory of the World. They actually wanted to have the footages of Marlon, Ramon E to be cataloged together with the Memory of the World. So I was supposed to be part of it, but I think it did not push through. So yeah. And what I wanted to ask Marlon was, how were you able to get those footages? I mean, where did it come from? You said there was a 1904 footage. There was also a 1920s footage. So I just wanted to know from which archive did you get this, and what was the process in acquiring these footages? Were they given to you, the original ones, or they gave you a copy or something and then you splice it up and splice it up together
No,
with your
I actually, most of the footage that you see is from the University of Pennsylvania Anthropology Museum, and then most of the photographic, the still images are from the National Archive, and some National Archive. But I would say 80% of the footage that you see are from University of Pennsylvania. And believe it or not, I actually saw the Blumentritt's tome of the survey of ethnographic tribes. I don't know if you know that, but Ferdinand Blumentritt, there are several existing copies. I think one is in archive, and then one is in the University of Pennsylvania. This is the actual original book of Ferdinand Blumentritt, and it was a gorgeous, like incredible book that had the photographs of the natives. But in answer to the audience question, most of the footage was actually from University of Pennsylvania. Then they lent it to me, and then I copied it. And so I have those footage. So when I die, maybe I'll just give it to Angel.
Can I have that in writing?
Is there a fee that you have to pay to access and use these materials? Especially if you're gonna use them in your own artistic.
No. If it's public domain, no. But if you're going to, because Marlon has beautiful, I mean, his reproduction of that footage is extraordinary, right? I mean, look at the quality of the black and white, the tones and everything. Marlon, correct me if I'm wrong, but if anything, the only thing, if it's in public domain that you have to pay for is to get a nice print. Is that correct?
Yeah. Okay. Just like in the Library of Congress, I don't know about it now, but before you could go there if you were a researcher, and they would actually, they actually allowed me to bring my camera here. And so I literally have hundreds of photographs that I copied from original photographs in the Library of Congress Museum. And you know what's ironic, Angel, is the Library of Congress, when I was a photographer, working in the early 80s, the Library of Congress was one of the first museums that bought my pictures as an artist. Yeah, and so I'm technically under my pictures as a photographer is part of the Library of Congress photo collection, but I also plundered their collection of Filipino photographs, and then I copied all of these, and then I kind of regurgitated all of those copies into my film. So it's a complete cycle. I don't know anymore what is true or what is representation in my head myself.
Well, I have, okay.
Hey, Cian, you know the image that I have in my head, it's like years, many years, decades, centuries from now, it's like going into a jail, right? And all you see are marks. And then you will say, Cian was here, Marlon was here, Kilroy was here. And then there are just marks counting the days and the months and the years. I was like, who the hell are these people? Oh wait, here's a photograph of Cian. It was taken, who is this woman? Who's this woman with glasses? I heard her name, oh, it's like Angel Show. What kind of a name is that? Where did she come from? This is like, wow, this is mind-blowing. And then there's like, someone made an installation of Cian, Angel, and Marlon, and then there's even an audio of it. And people are like, what the hell are they talking about? Oh well, let's go back and, what are we gonna eat today? Oh, let's do Thailand mixed with Bontoc food.
Marlon, you need to come
that's
back.
That's my vision of
Marlon.
That's my vision of the future.
Marlon, I'm going to figure this out because people need to see your photographs. I don't know if you've seen the rest of Outpost, which is part of Belasarte's. This is their gallery, but they have an extraordinary library here as well. And I will suggest to Jam that they get their hands on Margot Machida's book, which is the one and only book that exists on Asian American contemporary art. And Marlon's...
Do you have that?
I do. Wait, Marlon. I'm telling them that I will get it for Jam's library.
Yeah.
Okay? Because I think it's really important, and I'm working on this, so you gotta bear with me to try to bring Filipino-American artists' works to the Philippines. I think it's time that we share more of what we do, right?
I'll give you a copy when I see you in April.
Okay, that's a deal. That's a deal.
So you give it to this gallery.
I
They have it in their
will, and
library.
then you can sign it over to them, okay? Wait, Marlon, I'm so sorry, but we're gonna have to wrap up. I know you're just waking up, but but we're gonna have to wrap. Can you see me?
Yeah.
Hey, we can just see ourselves. Okay, I'm sorry, but we're gonna have to wrap up. I wish I could have done, sorry, I'm going to ramble now. Marlon should be here. I mean, really, folks. It's really important for works like his to be screened more than once. And I've seen Bontoc Eulogy. It came out in 1995. Marlon, I don't know if that was the first screening, but I definitely was there. And Jay Ruby was sitting right next to me. So I mean, it's really.
Were you in New York when this show? Was this in New York? I forget.
Yes. Anyway, private conversation because we've got to let the audience go. But yeah, I just really feel that it's important that we continue to build these kinds of bridges and have these kinds of dialogues, precisely so that our histories don't really disappear. I mean, they live within us, whether they're fiction or not, right? So I feel like for you young people here, I think that's a really important, sorry, I teach for a living. I think it's really important to keep remembering that, and that artifacts are alive, even if they're not real. And that's a brain twister, right? So I'd like to thank you, Marlon, for coming. Yeah.
Yeah. So in Baguio, there's a St. Louis University.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know how old that is.
It's old.
Yeah. Okay. So like I was in Baguio last October, and then
There's this American.
Yeah, exactly. But then, like, for me, like, okay. So I was, like, hanging out with a bunch of people, and then one of them was a professor in literature in St. Louis University. And then, like, so I was there just realizing that there is a St. Louis University in Baguio, and I was asking them how does that fit in to this context of St. Louis and Cordillera and everything about it. And then the professor in comparative literature at St. Louis University did not know of St. Louis World's Fair. So
Yeah, there you go.
there you go. Like, I don't know.
That's weird.
It is weird. But it's reality, Marlon. We still, how many times have they changed the street names here in the Philippines? But in any case, I'm really, really sorry that we're going to have to sign off. But I hope
Thank you for inviting me, Angel.
you're most welcome.
Thank you for waking up for us.
Yeah, and you're so alive. Well, unless you were up all night. But like I said, I'm going to be in LA. I'd love to see you, and thank you again very much. Somehow we have to figure out how to bring you here, okay?
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
All right. Bye. See ya.
right.
Let's meet up in your ear.
Yeah, I'll email you.
Thanks, Marlon.
Okay. Email me. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you everyone for coming. Yeah, so